Hello, hello. I'm back with another installment on Planetary Returns. So it turns out I'm doing this little mini series on Planetary Returns, so be sure to check out the other ones if you like this video. So today I'm going to be talking about Jupiter. I'm of course wearing my Jupiter shirt. Reminds me of the stripes on the big gas giant in our solar system. So yeah, what is a Jupiter return? So your Jupiter return is going to occur when Jupiter returns to the same sign that Jupiter is in your natal chart. So this happens every 12 years, roughly, depending on where you were born in Jupiter's journey through a sign. And you can also look at the exact degree where Jupiter is in your birth chart, and you can look at the exact time that Jupiter returns to that exact degree in your birth chart. And that is interesting too, because that is like a different kind of more exact return to pay attention to. But similar to the Saturn return, I think that the Jupiter return is the entire time, that entire year, roughly, period, that Jupiter is in the same sign that it resides in your birth chart. So what does it mean when you have a Jupiter return? Well, this happens every 12 years. So you're going to experience your Jupiter return roughly at the ages of 12, 24, 36, 48, 60, 72, and 84, and beyond if you're really lucky. So we can experience a lot of themes coming up around the Jupiter return that deal with the planet itself. So Jupiter deals with travel, expansion of the mind, trying to understand, trying to broaden your horizons, education, spirituality, seeking. So there's inner seeking, there's seeking of the mind and curiosity, there's exploration, growth. The Jupiter is all about growth. So when we have our Jupiter return, that's the name of the game, is exploration and personal expansion. Very often it's soulful expansion. I'm going to tell you a little story. So when I first joined a local astrology group, I was pretty young because it was all older people. And this one woman said to me, she's like, I bet you found astrology when you were 12. And I was like, how did she know? And she's like, well, that was your Jupiter return. And so, of course, like a lot of people will find astrology on their Jupiter return. So either 12 or 24. At the age of 12, especially for a young woman, this is the time very close to where she's getting her first period cycle. And so there is like an opening. There is an opening that's happening. Like you're becoming a woman, and there are certain channels and hormones that open alchemically in the mind. And so, yeah, there is something like psycho-spiritual about that process in the body that very often compels people to seek. Age of 24, that is a year that a lot of people are traveling. You know, it's a good year to travel because, you know, you're out of school. Maybe you've been working for a little bit. You have some money and you want to have some fun with it. So the Jupiter return at 24, that's also a very powerful time because it's like pure Jupiter return, because it's pre-Saturn return, because the Saturn return gets you in shape. It's like the Saturn return gets you to commit to the life that you're building. But the Jupiter return at 24 is like you have enough agency and license as an adult to do some pretty cool things that may stick with you for the rest of your life. So another story I have is during my second Jupiter return, I was just starting to study astrology. And I was in an ayahuasca ceremony outside. It was like a full moon, all women gathering together for this healing ritual. And I looked up in the sky and I saw Jupiter. And I saw Jupiter in the same constellation that it is when I was born. And even though there is like a constellational drift, I was taking that into consideration for sure. But yeah, I recognized the constellation Aries in the sky. And I was able to find, I was like, I'm seeing my Jupiter return right now. So that was really cool, really soulful, expansive period of my life. And so think back to your Jupiter returns, and you might want to check, you might want to calculate your Jupiter return, check an ephemeris, have an astrologer calculate it for you just to make sure, because I've seen people experience their Jupiter returns a little earlier. So like at 11, 35, etc., etc. So you want to double check and see. So yeah, Jupiter returns are usually very expansive, and it's a journey to discover. It's a journey to kind of get out of your comfort zone, see what else is out there. The Jupiter return is your cosmic reminder that you're here to experience life. There's a whole world out there, and you just get hungrier for a taste. Like, you want to see it, you want to feel it, you want to experience it. So yeah, very often Jupiter returns or other significant Jupiter transits can be about trying to broaden your horizons, trying to learn something new, travel, study, commit deeper to your spiritual practice even. So what's interesting though is that there is a parallel cycle kind of happening with the Jupiter return, because it's every 12 years. So your Jupiter return is often going to coincide with your first house perfection year. So this puts it a little bit into context, because this radical opening and this desire to get back out there and plug into the world is followed by our 12th house perfection year, which is usually a time of like deep contemplation, reflection. It's usually not the easiest time. There's usually a great deal of solitude. Very often people hit some sort of rock bottom in their 12th house perfection year, and it's like you're trying to get out of your own way. So it's a huge process of digging into the subconscious and doing a lot of healing work very often in the 12th house. It's like 12th house is the house of self-undoing. So very often there are self-destructive behaviors or thinking that need to be confronted during that time. So it's usually not the most fun time, 12th house perfection year. I mean, it can be used very constructively for sure, but it's like we enter this first house perfection year, which is like a rebirth. And it's like, all right, well, now I'm just going to focus on me, and I've cleared out some clutter, and it's a time to just really focus on myself. What am I about? You know, how do I meet the world? And yeah, so a lot of these Jupiter return themes of hope and expansion and broadening and confidence, like, yeah, I'm just going to go for it. I'm just going to try it. You got one life to live. I'm just going to go for it, can often correspond with this emergence out of the 12th house. You know, Jupiter can deal with opportunity. It can deal with luck. It can deal with the wheel of fortune, taking a chance on life. And it's all about like broadening your perspective. So if you spend a lot of time in introspection in the 12th house, looking deeply at your psyche, you're going to want to get out of your own head. You're going to want to get out into the world. So naturally, the Jupiter return is a perfect follow-up to any 12th house perfection year. So your Jupiter return, once again, you're going to have to consider your natal Jupiter. You're going to have to consider what it's doing in your chart. You're going to have to consider what sign it's in, how content is Jupiter in that sign and house, what aspects is Jupiter making, what houses does Jupiter rule in your chart. And so all of that stuff has to be taken into consideration to understand Jupiter's capacity to deliver a lot of the things that Jupiter often represents, like luck and fortune and optimism. You know, if you have Jupiter in Capricorn, for example, you're not going to be expecting the world to just hand you everything. Jupiter in Capricorn understands that a lot of the benefits and blessings that I have come from making the most of what I have. So being grateful for the things that you do have and making the most of them, or being able to kind of like trust in yourself and your efforts that the good things will come from that. So for example, every Jupiter placement is going to be a little bit different. So you want to really have a good grasp of what your natal Jupiter really represents in your chart before you can really delineate the Jupiter return. So the Jupiter return is essentially a recommitment to that natal promise of Jupiter in your chart. So it's like a repurposing, a refocusing. So if this year is about expansion and learning and growth, what does Jupiter already want to do in your birth chart? And what are those signatures telling us? And how else can we bring those into actualization? How else can we play with those potentials? So yeah, Jupiter really does deal a lot with freedom. When we think about the myth of Jupiter liberating his siblings from the belly of Saturn, Saturn didn't want his children to overthrow him, so he ate them. And then Jupiter and his mother tricked Saturn, and Jupiter liberated all of his siblings. And it was very inclusive. Like Jupiter then said, we're all going to have a part on Mount Olympus. And so yeah, there was a lot of freedom and possibility coming in, prosperity for all. Jupiter has a lot to do with fertility also. So thinking not just about fertility of human life, as we often think of with that word, but fertility can also be like proliferation of creativity or wealth. It's about abundance. It's about more. That's really what Jupiter is about. So maybe in our Jupiter return, we're like fertilizing new possibilities of potential for our life, for new understanding and everything like that. So yeah, it pairs nicely with the first house perfection year, which is an immense focus on personal character. Like, who am I and what am I doing in this world? How can I make it a better place even? Oh, and as a side note, you can calculate your Jupiter return. I find that it's really fascinating to calculate your Jupiter return for the location where life was taking place in hindsight. I find that there are so many other transits happening. Like if you were to calculate your Jupiter return right now and look at where Jupiter is placed in that chart for the next 12 years, there are going to be too many other transits happening in your life to just put a lot of emphasis on that. So I think Jupiter return charts are useful in retrospect. What was that cycle about? What was I learning? Where was I really expanding my soul understanding of a certain topic in life? Once again, where Jupiter is placed in the birth chart and which houses it rules are always going to be of primary importance. That's the natal promise. But if you look back at, if you calculate your Jupiter return, what was that about? What was that chapter? What was that 12-year cycle about? Where were you really learning a lot about? It can be really interesting to look at. So that's a little bit about your Jupiter return and your perfected 12th and first houses. Let me know if you want to learn more. You can also learn more about perfections and planets when you sign up for my courses. I have some new courses out. They run year round. We have the foundations course and we have the predictive modules that I do on transits and progressions, secondary progressions. So if you're interested to study with me and learn more, be sure to check out my website for more details. And I look forward to having you in class.